Hey guys, welcome to Beklaedt's YouTube channel. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe so you never miss out on new video guides, tips and tricks and much more. My name is Iben and in today's video I'll show you how to sew my jacket Tang lined version. If you have followed my channel for a while, you have probably seen that I have already made a video about this jacket. But in this new video, I'll show you how you can use the same sewing pattern to achieve a more ladylike jacket, sort of Chanel style. To make the jacket more feminine, I recommend to size down as the pattern has about 18 centimeters of positive ease around the bust, which is too much for a ladylike jacket. To get a jacket that looks nice and polished, we need to add interfacing to all pattern pieces, and then we need to enforce the shoulder with a shoulder pad and sleeve head. Does it sound difficult? It really isn't. I'll show you all the steps involved during this video. Remember that you can buy the pattern for this jacket on my website, Beklaedt.com. I'm using this thick, loosely woven boucle fabric, which is a mix of wool and other fibers. I bought the fabric from Ammo Threads, which sells deadstock fabric online. The fabric is quite heavy. It actually weighs 450 grams per square meter. I think these boucle fabrics are so beautiful, and the good thing is you can get them in so many different colors and weaves. We also need lining. I use a regular weave lining in acetate. As I said before, we need to interface all the pattern pieces. I'm using a lightweight woven interfacing with a nice drape and without stretch. We also need two sleeve heads, which is a kind of padding you add along the sleeve cap. You can buy them ready-made or make your own from a dense batting. Then we need a shoulder pad. I'll show you later in the video how you can make your own lightweight shoulder pad if you can't find the right one in the shops. Finally, we need matching thread. Buttons, and lightweight interfacing with threads to stabilize the shoulder seam. You can also use a ready-made stay tape. If you want to make your own shoulder pad, you need batting and cotton muslin. First step is to cut all the pattern pieces according to the cutting guide. If you work with a fabric that has a very visible pattern, you might want to consider only cutting through one layer at a time. My fabric doesn't really have a very significant pattern, so I choose to just lay the fabric double and thereby cut every pattern piece twice. Afterwards, the lining pieces should be cut from the lining. Last step is to cut interfacing for all the pattern pieces in outer fabric, but not the lining pieces. Start by adding the interfacing to the individual pattern pieces. Please remember to place the fusible side on top of the wrong side of the fabric. This type of interfacing needs to be added using steam. Press and steam for a couple of seconds before moving the iron to a new section. Finish the front and back yoke pieces with stay tape along the shoulder seams. As you can see, the fabric is at risk of unraveling. That's why I finish each raw edge with an overlock seam. If you don't have an overlocker, you can use a zigzag stitch instead. Find the front middle pieces and the front side pieces. Place the side pieces on top of the middle piece, right sides together, and pin the pieces together by the princess seam. Stitch the pieces together using a 1 cm seam allowance. Finish by pressing open the seam with your iron. Find the front yoke. Place it on top of the joined front pieces, right sides together, and place pins along the horizontal edge. Stitch the pieces together and press the seam open. We will be joining the back pieces the same way. Find the back middle piece and the 2 side pieces. Place the side pieces on top of the middle piece, right sides together, and place pins along the princess seam. Stitch the pieces together. And press the seam open. Find the back yoke and place it on top of the back pieces, right sides together, and place pins along the horizontal edge. Stitch the pieces together and press open the seam afterwards. Find the pockets and pocket flaps in both outer fabric and lining. Place the pieces on top of each other, right sides together, and stitch the pieces together with a 1 cm seam allowance. It's quite important that you leave a bit about 5 cm long along one of the long edges. Trim away the corners and flip the pieces around so the right side faces up. Use the beak of the scissor to press the corner into place. Fold the seam allowance towards the inside and place pins along the hole. Press both the pockets and the pocket flaps with your iron. Now it's time to make a buttonhole on the pocket flap. Find the middle of the flap along the long edge. Place the button on top and place pins that mark the length of the buttonhole. Stitch the buttonhole. I usually use double thread for buttonholes to get a thicker edge. Finally, cut open the buttonhole. Find the pocket and place it on top of the front jacket so the middle of the pocket along the short edge is aligned with the princess seam. The pocket should lay with a distance of 5 cm to the bottom of the jacket. The pocket flap is placed 2 cm above the top edge of the pocket. Please remember to place the middle of the flap on top of the princess seam as well. Stitch the pocket in place along the sides and the bottom a couple of millimeters from the edge. Also stitch the pocket flap in place along the top horizontal edge. Place the 2 front pieces flat on the table. Place the back piece on top, right sides together, and place pins along the shoulder seams and side seams. Stitch the pieces together and split open the seam with your iron. Find the upper and undersleeve. As you can see, the 2-piece sleeve has been shaped around the elbow, which is different from the 1-piece sleeve I used in the other video. Place the undersleeve on top of the upper sleeve, right sides together, and place pins. Stitch the sleeve pieces together. And split the seam open with your iron. Fold the sleeve in half, right sides together, and place pins along the side seam of the sleeve. Stitch the side seam. Press the side seam open. It is definitely easier to do this if you have an ironing board for sleeves, but you can also do it when the sleeve is laying as a double layer. Just don't iron directly on top of the folded edge. Finally, we need to iron the hemline of the sleeve 4 cm towards the wrong side all the way around. Now it's time to join the sleeves with the body. Mark the side and shoulder on the sleeve. Please double check you place the sleeves correctly. The undersleeve faces towards the back of the jacket. Pull the sleeve in under the bodice so the pieces lay right sides together. I always start by matching the shoulder seam with the shoulder notch and then the side seam with the side notch, before distributing the rest of the sleeve cap in the armhole. Stitch the sleeve in place. Alright, now we'll take a short break from the bodice, as we need to finish the collar. Find the two collars and place them on top of each other, right sides together, and place pins along the outer edge. Stitch the collars together along the outer edges. Trim away the corners and flip the pieces around so the right side faces up. Press the collar with your iron. If you're working with some thick fabric like me, it can be a good idea to understitch along the undercollar to keep the seam allowance in place. Find the notch which shows where the end of the collar is, as well as the center back along the neckline and collar. Match these notches and remember to place the collar so the upper collar faces upwards. Stitch the collar to the jacket along the neckline by making a stitch 5 mm from the edge. Find the two sleeve heads. There will typically be a little notch which shows you where the shoulder is. The short side faces towards the front bodice, while the long side faces towards the back bodice. The sleeve head is attached to the wrong side of the sleeve. Match the shoulder notch with the shoulder seam. Then pin the two legs of the sleeve head to the sleeve cap. It's very important to ease the sleeve head in place, so it doesn't end up pulling at the armhole. Stitch the sleeve head to the seam allowance about 5 mm from the edge. Alright, I'll now show you how I make my own lightweight shoulder pad. You can also just buy a shoulder pad if you prefer. Find the pattern pieces for the front and back yoke. Place them on top of a fresh piece of paper so the shoulder seam is aligned. Then draw the outline of the armhole. I measure 6 cm along the back curve and 5 cm along the front curve. Draw a line along the shoulder seam that is 10 cm long. Connect these points with each other as a smooth line and remember to mark which is the front and back. Finally, add 1 cm seam allowance all the way around. Find the batting, fold it in half and cut the pattern pieces out. Then cut a double layer of cotton muslin, which will be the cover of the shoulder pad. I cut the muslin on the bias so the pad doesn't become too stiff. Trim away the seam allowance from the pattern piece along the inner edges but not the armhole. Cut a second layer of batting, which is now smaller than the first one. Gather the layers like a sandwich. First a layer of muslin, then the big piece of batting, then the small piece of batting, and then muslin again. You decide how many layers of batting you want. I think a third layer would have worked well, but 2 layers are also okay. Finally, make a wide zigzag stitch all around the pad. To keep the 2 layers of batting together, I make a couple of stitches parallel with the shoulder seam. But this only works if your shoulder pad is thin. Otherwise, I think it's better to not do this. The finished shoulder pad is steamed over a tailor's ham to get a nice rounded shape. Now it's time to sew the shoulder pad to the jacket. Do this by hand. The shoulder pad should be flipped so it lays opposite of the jacket. That is, if the armhole looks like a happy mouth, the shoulder pad should look like a sad mouth. Remember to place the pad in the right direction so the front of the shoulder pad is pointing towards the front of the jacket. I find the shoulder notch on the shoulder pad, which is matched with the shoulder seam. The edge of the pad should be aligned with the seam allowance from the armhole. Stitch the shoulder pad in place by making a couple of stitches that go forward and then back a little. You shouldn't tighten the thread too much. Finally, make a couple of stitches that join the peak of the pad with the seam allowance from the shoulder seam. Find the neck facing and the two front facings and stitch the facings together by the shoulder seam, right sides together. Press open the shoulder seam with your iron. Find the front hem pieces and the back hem piece and stitch them together by the side seam, right sides together. Please remember to place the pieces correctly. Join the hem pieces with the front facing along the bottom edge of the front facing. You should only stitch the very bottom of the hem piece to the side of the facing, which is marked by a notch on the pattern pieces. Here you can see how the finished seam looks like. The joint facing is then attached to the jacket. Place the jacket on the table so the right side is facing up. Match the center back on the neck facing with the center back on the neckline and continue adding pins all around the edge. Please remember to match all seams with each other. That also needs to be pressed open. Stitch the facing to the jacket all the way around. Snip into the seam allowance along the neckline. Also trim away the 4 sharp corners of the facing. Turn the facing inside the jacket and press with your iron. We are going to make some understitching that helps to keep the seam allowance in place. We'll start by the collar. As you can see, I've cut into the seam allowance by the notch on the front yoke, which marks the breaking point. The seam allowance should be understitched to the jacket above the breaking point, while it should be understitched to the facing below the breaking point. We will also be understitching the seam allowance from the hem piece to the hem piece, a couple of millimeters from the edge. I start with the front collar as far up as I can get on the jacket side. Remember to let the right side face upwards. When I reach the breaking point, which is marked with a pin, I stitch over to the facing side and continue stitching down the front of the jacket. I use my fingers to feel if the seam allowance is correctly placed on the back side. Stitch as far down as you can. Then continue by stitching the seam allowance from the hem piece to the hem pieces. The last thing we need to do before adding lining to the jacket is to make sure the neck facing doesn't move around. While the neck facing is facing up, I stitch around the neckline about 5 mm from the collar. I start and stop a couple of centimeters before and after the shoulder seam on either side. Stitch at a slow pace to make sure you get a nice seam. And now for the lining. Find the 2 front lining pieces and close the bust pleat with pins right sides together. Find the back lining piece and place a pin by the neck pleat. Stitch the pleats by stitching directly down for about 2 cm on each piece respectively. Place the back lining on top of the front lining pieces right sides together and place pins along the shoulder seam and side seams. Stitch the seams and split them open afterwards. Find the sleeve pieces. Place the undersleeve on top of the upper sleeve, right sides together, and place pins. Stitch the pieces together and split the seam open. Fold the sleeve in half, right sides together, and add pins along the side seam. Please remember to leave about 20 cm along one of the sleeves, which we will use to turn the jacket through. Stitch the lining sleeves to the armhole just like we did for the jacket sleeve. Use the notches to add the sleeves correctly. Stitch the sleeves in place. We are now ready to add the lining to the jacket. Place the jacket flat on the table so the right side is facing up. Find the center back on the neck facing and match this with the back pleat on the back lining, right sides together. Continue adding pins along the front facing and use the bust pleat and notch on the facing as navigation. Pin the bottom edge of the lining to the hem pieces on the jacket, right sides together. For now, you should just ignore the awkward corner bit between the facing and hem piece. Stitch the lining to the jacket. I start by the bottom of the jacket. At the corner, between the front facing and the hem piece, you'll be able to press the surplus lining into the wedge between the two pieces, which shapes a pleat on the lining. Add pins. Do the same on the other side. After this, you can continue stitching the lining to the jacket all the way around. Pull the jacket through the hole in the lining. In order to attach the sleeve lining by the wrist, you need to press one hand through the hole in the lining so your hand lays between the lining and outer fabric. With your other hand, fold the lining down so both layers touch each other, right sides together. With a firm grip, pull both layers back out through the hole in the lining. Match the seams with each other, split the seams open and place pins. Stitch the lining in place. Here you can see how the finished jacket looks like. Do the same on the other sleeve. To avoid the hem pieces from falling down when the jacket is worn, I usually stitch the seam allowance from the hem piece to the seam allowance from the side seam. Now we can close off the hole in the lining. Fold the lining 1 cm towards the wrong side and place pins. You choose if this should be done by hand or making a narrow stitch on the sewing machine. Press the jacket with lots of steam. Press the collar into shape as well and use a tailor's ham underneath. Last step is to add the buttons and buttonholes. I usually lay the buttons on top of the jacket beforehand to visualize how they should be placed. The first button is placed next to the breaking point, which I mark with a horizontal pin. The center of the button should lay on the center fold line, which is 2 cm away from the jacket edge. My button is 22 mm wide. I measure 1.5 cm inwards on the front jacket to place a vertical pin. Then I measure 2.5 cm further inwards and place another pin to mark the end of the buttonhole. I choose to place my buttons with a vertical distance of 11 cm to each other, but it is entirely up to you how you want to place your buttons. Stitch the buttonholes and carefully cut them open. Then add the buttons to the other side, so the center of the button is on the center fold line. Also add 2 buttons to the pockets. And that was it! Look at how beautiful the jacket is! You can experiment with adding more details to the jacket like ribbons and fringes to get an extra ladylike jacket. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a like. You are also welcome to share it with your friends. Please remember to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram @Beklaedt Sewing as well. Bye now!